The water at the community center was always hot, scalding if you turned the knob too far. For most of the kids, this was a luxury. For 8-year-old Stellan Kovac, it was just a fact, one he noted with the detached precision of a scientist. He knew the exact temperature because he felt it through the thin cotton of his t-shirt and the worn denim of his jeans. He showered with his clothes on. Every Tuesday and Thursday, after the free play hour in the gymnasium, the kids would line up for the showers before the tutoring session began. They'd grab their small, threadbare towels from the bin, their laughter echoing off the tiled walls. Stellan would wait until last. He'd walk into the shower stall, the one at the far end with the drain that gurgled, and turn the water on. He never took off his shoes. The water would darken his jeans to black, plaster his shirt to his skinny chest, and run in rivulets from the cuffs of his sleeves. He would stand there for exactly 4 minutes, eyes closed, letting the heat soak through the layers of fabric. When he came out, dripping a trail onto the floor, the other kids would fall silent. Sometimes a new kid would whisper, loud enough for everyone to hear, "What's wrong with him? Why's he all wet?" The older kids just looked away. They were used to it. Stellan would walk past them, his sneakers squelching, and sit on the bench by the lockers. He wouldn't shiver, not even in the winter when the draft from the main hall was a cold knife. He'd just sit, water pooling around his feet, waiting for his clothes to stop dripping so he could go to tutoring. He had learned how to be still. He had learned that if you were still enough, quiet enough, people eventually forgot you were there. Mrs. Garcia, the center's director, would watch him with a weary ache in her heart. She'd tried talking to him once, early on. "Stellan, honey, you can take your clothes off. It's safe here." He had looked at her with eyes that held no tears, no anger, just a profound and ancient emptiness. He didn't answer. He just waited for her to walk away. She had called his mother, Petra, who had sighed a sound so broken it felt like it came through the phone in pieces. "I know," she'd said. "He just does that. Please don't push him." So they didn't. The wet clothes became his uniform, the 4-minute shower his ritual, the silence his shield. He was a ghost in soaked denim, a boy held together by water and will. Ezekiel Toussaint saw the boy on his first day volunteering. Ezekiel was 62 years old, with a stillness that mirrored the boy's, though his was born of peace, not of pain. He had retired after 28 years as a social worker, most of them in the trenches of Child Protective Services. He had seen things that had carved themselves into the lines around his eyes. For the last 19 years, he had been a member of the Iron Covenant Motorcycle Club, a brotherhood of mostly older black men, veterans, retired cops, mechanics, and teachers, who found solace in the rumble of a V-twin engine and a shared, unspoken understanding of the world's sharp edges. The club's partnership with the Northwood Community Center was Ezekiel's idea. "Our job is to ride for those who can't," he told his brothers, and sometimes that means just showing up. Ezekiel was a large man, broad-shouldered from a life of carrying things, both literal and metaphorical. His black leather vest, worn soft with thousands of miles, bore the Iron Covenant patch, a stylized anvil wrapped in chains. His head was shaved, and his salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed. He moved with a deliberate gentleness that seemed at odds with his formidable size. He was there to help with facility maintenance, but his eyes, trained by 3 decades of looking for what was hidden, scanned the landscape of children. He saw the loud ones, the shy ones, the leaders, the followers, and then he saw Stellan. He watched the boy play basketball by himself, his movements jerky and contained, as if he were afraid of taking up too much space. He watched him at the end of the hour, trailing the other kids to the showers, and he watched him emerge minutes later, a small, sodden figure leaving a dark trail on the linoleum. The other volunteers looked away. Mrs. Garcia's face tightened with that familiar, helpless pain. But Ezekiel didn't look away. He saw the soaked clothes not as a strange quirk, but as a piece of armor. He had seen it before. A 14-year-old girl in a group home who slept in her winter coat. A 6-year-old boy who wouldn't let anyone touch his hands. It was the language of trauma, a dialect he understood fluently, the body remembering what the mind was trying to forget. The clothes were a barrier, a desperate, last-ditch effort to keep the world out, a second skin when your own had been made to feel unsafe. His mind flashed back 20 years to a boy named Marcus, a foster placement. Marcus would hide in the closet for hours after his weekly supervised visit with his father. Ezekiel had sat outside that closet door for 3 days, just reading a book aloud, until the door finally creaked open. The reasons were always different, but the armor was always the same. Ezekiel didn't go to Mrs. Garcia. He didn't look up Stellan's file. The first step was not to investigate. The first step was to witness. To let the boy know he was seen, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person who was there. He found a rickety workbench in a disused storage alcove that had a clear view of the gymnasium and the hallway leading to the showers. He went to the trunk of his car and came back with a heavy canvas bag. He sat down and, with methodical calm, began to disassemble, clean, and polish the carburetor from his 1998 Harley-Davidson Road King. He laid the pieces out on a clean rag, one by one. He didn't look at Stellan. He just existed in his space. He was a mountain, solid and unmoving. He was just there. Hit subscribe if you believe that sometimes the greatest help you can offer is your quiet presence. Comment the name of your city and share this with someone who needs to know that being seen is the first step to being healed. For 2 weeks, that was the routine. Ezekiel would arrive at 3 o'clock, set up his workspace in the alcove, and begin his quiet work. He'd clean spark plugs with a wire brush. He'd polish chrome bits until they gleamed. He'd organize nuts and bolts into little magnetic trays. He became part of the background noise of the center, the gentle scrape of metal on metal, the scent of oil and solvent. Stellan noticed him on the first day. Adults were either obstacles or authorities. They told you what to do, where to go, what you were doing wrong. This man did none of those things. He just sat. He was big, bigger than any of the men who had ever been in his life, but he was quiet. He took up space, but he didn't demand it. Stellan watched him from the corner of his eye as he shot his lonely baskets. He watched the man's large, careful hands moving over the engine parts. They were hands that knew how to fix things. On the Tuesday of the 3rd week, as Stellan walked past the alcove on his way to the showers, a small brass jet rolled off Ezekiel's bench and clattered to the floor, stopping near Stellan's worn sneakers. Stellan froze. He expected a sharp word, an impatient sigh. That's what usually happened when he was in the way. Ezekiel didn't even look up at first. He just said, his voice a low, calm rumble, "Ah, shoot. Butterfingers." He slowly leaned over, his knees cracking softly. He wasn't looking at Stellan, but at the small brass piece. He didn't ask the boy to pick it up. He gave Stellan all the time in the world to decide what to do. Stellan's heart hammered in his chest. After a long moment, he bent down, his movements stiff, and picked up the jet. It was surprisingly heavy, still warm from the man's hands. He held it out. Ezekiel finally looked at him, his eyes kind. "Thank you, young man. Appreciate that." He took the jet, his fingers brushing Stellan's for a fraction of a second. There was no pressure, no expectation. Stellan just nodded, a tiny, jerky motion, and continued on his way to the showers. When he came out 4 minutes later, soaked and silent, he walked past the alcove. The big man was still there, working. He didn't look up, but Stellan felt his presence like a low, steady hum. The next day, Ezekiel brought 2 rags. He laid out his tools as usual. When Stellan walked by after his basketball, Ezekiel spoke without looking at him. "This chrome's a bear to get clean. Always smudges." He didn't ask for help. It was just a statement, an observation shared with the air. Stellan hesitated for a moment, then kept walking. He took his shower. He came out. He sat on the bench, dripping. But this time, he watched Ezekiel. He watched him rub a piece of chrome with a rag, hold it up to the light, frown at a smudge, and start again. On Thursday, Ezekiel did the same thing. He had a small can of polishing compound and 2 soft cloths. He worked on a chrome air filter cover. Stellan finished his shower. He sat on the bench. He waited until his clothes were only damp instead of soaked. Then he stood up. He walked over to the alcove, his steps quiet. He stood there, a few feet away, just watching. Ezekiel didn't acknowledge him for a full minute. He just kept polishing. Then, slowly, he pushed the second clean cloth toward the edge of the bench. He said nothing. Stellan looked at the cloth. He looked at the man's hands. He looked at the half-polished piece of metal. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. He picked up the cloth. It was soft and dry, a strange and wonderful feeling. He stood beside Ezekiel, a small, damp boy next to a mountain of a man, and he started to polish the other side of the air filter cover. They worked in silence for 10 minutes. Stellan's motions were small and tentative at first, then more confident. He mimicked the circular pattern Ezekiel was using. He focused on a single smudge until it was gone. It was the first time he had willingly stood next to an adult man in 2 years. When Mrs. Garcia came to call the kids for tutoring, she stopped in her tracks. She saw the 2 of them, side by side, working on the same piece of metal. Ezekiel looked up at her and gave a subtle shake of his head. "Don't make it a thing." She nodded, her eyes shining, and quietly called the other children. "Stellan," she said softly. "Time for tutoring." Stellan carefully placed his cloth on the bench. "See you Thursday," Ezekiel said, his voice casual. Stellan nodded, and for the first time he spoke to the man. Okay, it was just one word, but it was a beginning, a foundation. If you're enjoying this story, hit that hype button right now. It's free, takes a second, and helps this video reach more people who need to see it. Now back to the story. The polishing became their ritual. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Stellan would finish his shower, sit for a few minutes, and then join Ezekiel at the bench. Ezekiel always had a project. Sometimes it was chrome. Sometimes it was sanding a piece of wood for a new saddlebag liner. He gave Stellan a small block of wood and a piece of 220 grit sandpaper. "Feel how it's rough?" he said. "The job is to make it smooth." Stellan ran his fingers over the wood. He felt the tiny ridges and imperfections. He started to sand, back and forth, with the grain, just as Ezekiel showed him. He fell into the rhythm of it, the scrape of the paper, the feel of the wood slowly, almost magically, transforming under his fingers. It was quiet work. It was predictable work. You did the thing, and the thing changed. The world made sense right here at this bench. One day, Stellan tested him. He was sanding, and he, accidentally, let the block slip from his hand. It clattered to the floor. He flinched, bracing for the inevitable annoyance, the sharp intake of breath, the lecture on being careful. Ezekiel just bent down, picked it up, and handed it back to him. "It's okay," he said. "Wood's slippery sometimes." That was it. No anger, no punishment, just grace. Stellan took the block back, his throat tight. He had dropped things before. In the second house, dropping a plate meant no dinner. In the third house, it meant you were clumsy and stupid, and you had to clean it up while Mr. Harris watched you, his eyes making you feel small and dirty. Ezekiel just gave the block back. Another time, Ezekiel was telling a story about his bike, about a long ride he took through the Blue Ridge Mountains. "The air up there," he said, "it's so clean it feels like it's washing you out from the inside." Stellan stopped sanding. He looked at his hands, covered in a fine layer of sawdust. "They make you take them off." The words were so quiet, Ezekiel almost missed them. He stopped polishing. He turned his body slightly toward the boy, an invitation, not a demand. "Your clothes?" Stellan nodded, his eyes fixed on the wooden block in his hands. "Yes, in the bad houses, before Mom got me back." He said bad houses the way another kid might say summer camp, a simple, factual category. "The water is cold," he continued, his voice flat, a recitation of facts. "They watch you, to make sure you're clean." One of them, he had a tattoo, a snake, on his arm. He would stand in the door. Ezekiel's blood ran cold. He knew this story. He had read versions of it in 100 case files. The casual violation, the abuse of power disguised as care, the shame that sticks to a child's skin like tar. He wanted to pull the boy into a hug, to wrap his arms around him and shield him from the memory. He wanted to find the man with the snake tattoo and dismantle him. But he did none of those things. His training, his experience, his very soul told him that what this boy needed right now wasn't rage or rescue. He needed a witness. He needed his truth to be held, gently. He took a slow breath. "That's a hard thing, Stellan. A very hard thing to carry." Stellan shrugged, a gesture far too old for his small shoulders. "It's better now. Mom is here." Ezekiel nodded. "Both things can be true. It can be better now, and what happened before can still hurt. You're allowed to be angry about it. You're allowed to be sad about it." "Angry?" Stellan looked up, confused. He wasn't angry. He was nothing. He had packed the feelings away into a small, locked box inside him. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. Anger got you noticed. Ezekiel saw the confusion. "It's okay if you don't feel it now," he said. "Sometimes feelings come later. The important thing is, it wasn't your fault. You were a kid. It's a grown-up's job to keep kids safe. They didn't do their job. It was never your fault." Stellan looked down at the block of wood in his hands. He ran his thumb over the surface. It was almost perfectly smooth now. He thought about the cold water, the snake tattoo, the feeling of being watched. He thought about his clothes, soaked and heavy, a wet wall between him and the world. He didn't say anything else, but a tiny crack had appeared in the locked box. They worked in silence for the rest of the afternoon, but it was a different kind of silence. It was a silence that held a shared truth. When Stellan left for tutoring, he left the sanded block on the bench. It was smooth as glass. If Bike Diaries has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Just a couple bucks a month keeps these stories coming. Links below, and hit that hype button if you haven't already. Now back to the story. The next day, Ezekiel found Mrs. Garcia in her office. He didn't mention Stellan's confession. That was the boys' to share, not his. "I've been getting to know Stellan Kovac a little," he said. "He's a good kid, a great helper." Mrs. Garcia's face softened. "He is. He's a wonderful boy. He's been through a lot." "Tell me about his mom, Petra," Ezekiel asked gently. "If it's okay." "She works 2, sometimes 3 jobs," Mrs. Garcia explained, her voice heavy. "Cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at a grocery store in the morning. She got Stellan back from the foster system about a year ago. She's a good mom, Ezekiel. She's just drowning. She's terrified they'll take him away again if she asks for help, if she admits she's not coping. Her car is a wreck. She's always worried about making rent. The stress is eating her alive. Ezekiel listened, his expression calm, but his mind working. This wasn't a problem he could fix with a wrench and some polish, but the Iron Covenant was more than a riding club. It was a network. That evening, he made 2 calls. The first was to a brother named Bear, a retired mechanic who ran a small garage. Ezekiel explained the situation, leaving out names. A single mom, a broken-down car, a kid who needs his mom to have one less thing to worry about. The second call was to the club's treasurer. The Iron Covenant had a discretionary fund, seeded by member dues and their annual charity ride. It was for exactly this kind of thing, for falling through the cracks. 2 days later, Bear showed up at Petra Kovac's apartment complex. He saw her trying to start her rusted 2003 Toyota Corolla, the engine making a horrible grinding noise. He walked over, wiping his hands on a rag he always carried. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Sounds like your starter's shot. I've got a tow truck down the street, was on my way to another job. I can give you a lift to my shop, take a look. No charge for the tow." Petra, exhausted and on the verge of tears, could only nod. At the shop, Bear told her the starter was gone and the alternator was failing. It would be over $600. She slumped against the wall. She didn't have it. She didn't even have 100. "Tell you what," Bear said, looking at a spot on the wall behind her. "I got a rebuilt starter in the back from a job that canceled, and I think I can patch up that alternator. Let's just call it $75 for the parts. Don't tell my wife." Petra stared at him, tears finally spilling over. "Are you serious?" Bear just grunted. "Get you back on the road. That's the job." The next week, a delivery from a local grocery store arrived at her door. It was anonymous. Canned goods, pasta, bread, milk, fresh fruit. A note attached just said, "From a neighbor." Ezekiel finally met Petra a week after that. He introduced himself as a volunteer from the center. He didn't mention the car or the groceries. He just told her what a great kid Stellan was, how he was a natural with his hands, how focused he was. "You're doing a good job, ma'am," he said, his voice full of a sincerity she hadn't heard in years. "It's hard out here. You're doing a great job." Petra felt something in her chest unclench, a knot of fear and shame she'd been carrying for years. She found herself telling him things, about her ex, about losing Stellan, about the fight to get him back, about the constant gnawing fear. Ezekiel just listened. He didn't offer advice, he just listened. Before he left, he gave her a small card. "This is for a family counseling service," he said. "It's free. A friend of mine runs it. No pressure. Just if you ever want someone to talk to. They're good people." Petra took the card. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't completely alone. The weight on her shoulders was still there, but it felt a little lighter, as if someone had come to stand beside her and help her carry it. Small things started to change. Stellan noticed his mom smiling more. There was more food in the cupboards. She wasn't as tired. She started tucking him in at night again, something she hadn't had the energy to do for months. He didn't know why things were better. He just knew they were. And at the center, he kept sanding. He graduated from the block of wood to a rough-sawn plank that Ezekiel said would become a shelf. He learned the difference between 80 grit and 400 grit paper. He learned how to stain the wood, how to wipe it down, how to apply the first coat of sealant. He was making something real and solid and smooth. The seasons turned. Summer bled into a crisp, cool autumn. The leaves outside the community center windows turned gold and red. Stellan's ritual continued. Basketball, shower, polishing. The soaked clothes, the silent dripping. The armor was still necessary. but it was getting heavier. One Tuesday in late October, they were finishing the shelf. Stellan was applying a final coat of wax with a soft cloth, his movements sure and practiced. The wood glowed with a deep, warm luster. Ezekiel looked at the shelf, then at the boy. "That's beautiful work, Stellan. You made that." Stellan ran his hand over the smooth, finished surface. It was perfect. He looked up at Ezekiel, his expression serious. "The water here is warm." Ezekiel met his gaze. "Yes, it is. And nobody watches." "No," Ezekiel said, his voice soft. "Nobody watches. It's your space." Stellan was quiet for a long time, his hand resting on the smooth, safe wood he had created. He looked down the hall toward the showers. He looked at his own clothes, still dry. He looked at Ezekiel, his solid, patient friend. Then he stood up and walked toward the showers. He didn't take a towel. Ezekiel didn't say a word. He just stayed at the bench, his heart a slow, heavy drum in his chest. He didn't hope. He didn't pray. He just waited. That was the whole job. Just to wait. To hold the space. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The usual 4-minute ritual was long over. Ezekiel began cleaning his tools, his movements automatic. He refused to let his anxiety show. This was Stellan's journey, his choice. 15 minutes. Ezekiel could hear the water shut off. He heard the metallic click of a locker door. Then, footsteps. Not the familiar squelch of wet sneakers, a soft, shuffling sound. Stellan appeared at the end of the hall. He was wearing the dry gym shorts and t-shirt that had been in his locker for a year. His hair was wet, slicked back from his forehead. In his hands, he carried a bundled-up, dirty pile of his jeans and shirt. He was dry. He walked up to the alcove and stopped in front of Ezekiel. He didn't smile. His face was solemn, as if he'd just completed a great and difficult task. He looked Ezekiel in the eye and gave a single, tiny nod. Ezekiel's throat closed. He felt a sting behind his own eyes, a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled him. He swallowed it down. This wasn't about him. This was about the boy. He simply nodded back, a mirror of Stellan's gesture. It wasn't a celebration. It was an acknowledgement. A quiet, monumental victory witnessed by two people in a dusty alcove over the smell of wood stain and motor oil. Stellan put his dirty clothes in his backpack. He picked up the rag and gave the shelf one last gentle wipe. Then he went to tutoring. Thank you for watching this story about Stellan, a boy who wore his pain like a uniform, and Ezekiel, the man who taught him it was safe to take it off. Millions of children live with the silent scars of trauma and neglect. Their armor can look like anger, withdrawal, or strange behaviors we don't understand. But underneath, there is always a child who needs to be seen. If you see a child who is struggling, don't look away. You don't have to have all the answers. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is offer your quiet, consistent, and unconditional presence. If you, or someone you know, needs help, or if you suspect a child is being abused or neglected, please reach out. You can call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD. That's 1-800-422-4453. There are people there to listen, 24/7. Your call can make a difference. It can be the start of a new story. Subscribe to Bike Diaries for more stories of hope and healing. Hit that hype button to boost this video and help it find the people who need it most. And if you want to support what we do, the membership link is in the description below. Share this with everyone who needs to remember that healing doesn't happen overnight, but it can start in a single moment of trust. 3 months later, on a bright, cold Saturday morning, Ezekiel's Road King rumbled to a stop in front of Stellan's apartment building. Petra and Stellan were waiting on the curb. Petra's eyes were bright with tears, but they were happy tears. She hugged Stellan tightly, then helped him with the helmet Ezekiel had bought for him. It was black and glossy, with a single silver star on the side. "You listen to Mr. Toussaint, you hear me?" Petra said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Mom." Stellan climbed onto the seat behind Ezekiel. He put his hands hesitantly on Ezekiel's waist. "Hold on tight, son," Ezekiel said. Stellan adjusted his grip, his fingers locking together over the worn leather of Ezekiel's vest. He wasn't holding on from fear. He was holding on with excitement. With a roar, the bike pulled away from the curb. They rode out of the city, toward the open country roads. The wind was a clean, sharp force, whipping past Stellan's helmet, and for the first time, he felt like he was moving faster than his memories. He leaned into the turn, a small, dry boy on the back of a big, steady man, the world opening up in front of them. The journey wasn't over, but the road was clear.